Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the RA Group's webcast series. Today we'll be continuing to talk about the future of hospitality, especially focusing on how the UK dining scene will cope and adapt post-COVID-19. I'm joined by an excellent panel of industry heavyweights: Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall from the River Cottage, Michel Roux Jnr from the Gavroche, and Jason Atherton from the Social Restaurant Company. I've known them all for many years, and I'm proud to say they also work very closely with us at RA. Thank you for joining us all today, guys. Okay, let's kick off with the first question. What's your thoughts on how the social distancing will affect the restaurant industry, with potentially only being able to have 40 to 50% occupancy based on table distance of between 1.5 to 2 metres? Do you think, A, it will be financially viable to reopen whilst these stipulations are in place? And if so, what operational changes do you think you'll need to implement? That one's for you, Michel.
Sure, straight in for me. Thank you, David. Gosh, well, personally, I don't think it's viable. I can't think of any restaurants that will be able to survive on only 50% business. I mean, I take my own, Le Gavroche, for instance. I need minimum 80% full capacity. Otherwise, I don't make ends meet. It's simple as that. So if going forward, for instance, the government says that we are not allowed to open our restaurants unless there are these restrictions in place, so either distancing of tables or saying that you're only allowed so many guests per square meters or 50% of your normal capacity, it's not going to work. We're going to need help as an industry. We're going to need continued help, financial help. Now, how that comes, I don't know. That's up for discussion. But personally, I can't see it happening unless, as I said, we get financial help or we change our model. So we change our model. So maybe we do some outside catering more, takeaways or such like. My problem with that is at Mayfair. In Mayfair, I don't have that many people that want to queue up and queue up for Gavroche food takeaway. It just wouldn't. I did try a little bit of it. It doesn't quite work for me. But other restaurants, it may work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very, very good points. The next question, what potential opportunities or upsides do you think could come out of the current situation? That one's for you, Hugh.
Michel's absolutely right. It's going to be extremely hard if this distancing model really does impose about a 50% restriction, so that a 120-seater becomes a 60-seater or a 50-seater. It's going to be very hard. But I do think that there are as many different models as there are restaurants. No two restaurants are the same. And there is going to be a great appetite from the public to get back out there and enjoy themselves when lockdown is over. So we've got to be ready to be creative and adaptable and flexible. And yes, we're definitely going to need support, but we're also going to have to stretch all our own muscles. I mean, I think of the hospitality industry as a creative industry, and we're going to have to be ready to do things differently. Now, we certainly will look at takeaway and delivery as part. In fact, we've already done that in our Axminster restaurant. We have got one chef cooking 1 day a week for a supper club, where we're putting out 50 to 70 meals. That's just partly to support the local community. Along with the supper club meals, we're also doing meals for people locally who are in need, working with a brilliant charity called Half, who distribute some of the food we make for the supper club, goes to people for free as well. And just that little adaptation that we've had to do during lockdown, I think sets a bit of a precedent for the kind of thinking we're all going to have to do in a post-lockdown world. What we do need is to know and understand and digest what the restrictions are going to be as soon as possible, so we can all put our thinking caps on and work out what might be viable. But if you're running a restaurant 50% capacity, you need a different business model. Otherwise, you're not going to be in business at all. Where does that leave your staff? So we are grateful for the government support we've had. It was very interesting when Boris Johnson made his very first speech this morning after several weeks out of action. He mentioned the hospitality industry. I was very encouraged by that. The only actual specific area of business that he name-checked in his speech, implying that they recognise the importance of our sector and that the government would continue to support. But we want to know what that support looks like, and we want to know what the rules look like and then we can get creative and start adapting.
That's a very good point, and it actually leads on to the next question. What else do you think the government could do to further support the industry? I mean, Germany announced on Friday that they're going to reduce VAT to 7% from 1st July this year to 1st July next year. I mean, what other things do you think our government could do to really support us coming out of this really positive the other side? Jason?
Hi, David. Yeah, so I think one of the big things for us, especially central London restaurant, any restaurant in general, really, or any hospitality business, is the big thing is rent. If you take somewhere like Holland Street Social, for instance, it's including business rates, it's £55,000 a month to keep that, just to be able to turn the key in the door. Logic tells you if you're taking 50% of your seats out, you're not going to be able to meet those demands. Obviously, then that kicks the can down to the landlords, but the landlords also have commitments with their banks, with their, a lot of these are linked to pension funds and such like. So I think there needs to be a real conversation at government level around, helping the landlords to be able to help the tenants to give us a fighting chance when we go back. Because logic tells you that if you go back at half capacity, you then got half the amount of staff, half the amount of business tax you can pay, half the amount of energy bills, half the amount of everything, right? And then the poor staff, what happens to those? Are they going to be able, if you go back to 50% of your staff, can you then extend the furlough to the people who can't come back to work until such times that they can come back to work? It's a very, very, very complex web they've got to build up to get our industry back to full health, and it's going to be, a long, long road. But I think the only one thing I do know for sure is that we are adaptable. We are, we are a very generous industry in general, and I do believe that we'll come through this. What that will look like is going to be very different, and I think we have to have the government support 100%. Otherwise, we will not come through this, because restaurants are precarious places, and 3-4 months of losing money, and you're done. You're finished. You're out of business.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the caterer asked one of that same question. Have you found the landlords receptive to discussion around rent payments during this crisis?
Some are, some aren't. We've got several properties across the city, and some landlords want to help. Some are in a position where they can because they're massive companies. I mean, basically, what we're trying to do is do packages for the landlords where we don't pay any rent till we go back. We then get a discount on that rent by 25%. We'll then package in the other 75% over the terms of the lease. So if you've got 10 years left on your lease and you've run up a debt of 100 grand, you pay an extra 10 grand a year on top of the rent you're going to pay when you go back for the next 10 years. Now, that only works if you go back and you start making money, so you can pay the rent. So then what we've asked for is, if that doesn't work, are you willing to have a conversation about turnover rent until such time we can get back to the realms of business we used to do pre-COVID-19?
You, anything to add on that?
Well, I think that's right. Different landlords have different models. They have different responsibilities, and they emerge from different types of business. But most landlords that rent restaurant properties, those properties are not massively suited for other uses, or sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And landlords want people in those buildings. We're in them. And they'd rather help us out, probably, than try and go to the trouble of starting from scratch, looking for a new outlet, a new business to go into their property. So it's going to work much better if they are helpful. But of course, they want clarity. They want, and they want a model. So it's very interesting to hear Jason say that they've already got into quite clear discussions with landlords about numbers, about reduced rents, about periods of paying no rent, and then a plan to get it back on track. And if you're prepared to come up with a proposition to your landlord that's well thought through, I think you're going to have a much more sympathetic hearing than if you just throw your hands up in the air and say, sorry, mate, I can't pay you. I'll get back to you when I can. And so landlords like us are going to want to know, well, if we're going to be making generous allowances to the industry for a long period of time, what's the backup for us? Is there government support for us? This is a chain, most businesses operate we're all along the line, whether it's our supply, whether it's our rent, our employees. It's all a very complex chain, and any decisions we make have knock-on effects. And we have to put ourselves in the position of the landlords, of our employees, most of all, of course, of our customers. And that's how we're going to think our way through this situation and come out with solutions that actually work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With financial uncertainty ahead and the talk of possible global recession, do you think fine dining will endure the current formats? Michel?
There will always be restaurants, high-end restaurants, because we always have those special, occasions, birthdays, anniversaries and such like, and we want to be pampered. But how we're going to be pampered and how we operate will change for sure. So there may be a lot less, high-end restaurants. But no. I think of myself. Do I still want to go to a place like Gavroche or a place like Alain Ducasse or whatever? Those high-end, amazing restaurants. Yes, I do. Of course, I want to. I want to spoil myself. I want to feel, the best. But then I also want to go to my local bistro. I want to go to my local pub and have a great Ploughman's, but what I miss the most, and I think this is what most people, will agree, is I just miss the buzz, the conviviality and socializing.
Yeah.
And socializing with a screen around my table and seeing a waiter come to me with a mask on doesn't do it for me. So yeah, I agree with you, Hugh, that we're going to have to be imaginative, and the catering industry, the hospitality industry is very imaginative and very strong. Actually, got some strong leaders and people like your good selves here. So we will pull through. Not all of us will pull through, but we'll be stronger for it at the end because we are a resilient bunch too.
Yeah, and Peter Harden from Harden's asked a very similar question. What trends do you foresee, particularly in the more ambitious end of the market? Will tasting menus survive? Jason?
I think, listen, first of all, on a personal level, I hope they survive, because I think it's a really interesting and creative way to eat. It's not for everybody, of course it's not. The question, I think the next 12 months are going to be very tricky for fine dining restaurants because the amount of time you invest in going into that restaurant. I think it might take 3-4 months for people to get the confidence to spend 4, 5, 6 hours in a restaurant, going through a series of courses and wine pairings. That's my sensible head. My optimistic head says I think people are just desperate to get back out there, and I think people are willing to. Well, I hope are going to be willing to go back to restaurants. So I think fine dining restaurants have always existed. They will always exist in some shape or form. I think a la carte restaurants like Le Gavroche, like the Waterside, like you get a lot of the top restaurants a la carte, Alain Ducasse, like Michel mentioned, what do a la carte as well as tasting menu. You might get a bigger response to start with, purely because you can go there and have a starter, main course, dessert in an hour and a half, 2 hours, and not have as much interaction with the waiters as you would when you go for a whole tasting menu. But nonetheless, no one's got a magic ball. No one can see really what the future holds. But I just think, the trends, what will come out of this. I really don't know. I can't answer that honestly. I really can't, because I just don't know. Yeah.
Another question from Peter Harden is: will we see a lower ingredient cost per dish, and more bargain pre-fixé menus, and a cheaper wine option maybe, as we did in the early 1990s recession? Michel?
Yeah. I mean, I think for sure. Definitely. Am I not on mute? No, you're okay. You can hear me. Yeah, I think there will be cheaper options there. But the one thing I think going forward, the only little bit of positive I can see out of it is that more people will be hopefully buying local, buying British, and that's important. You know, we need to buy local, we need to buy British, we need to help our suppliers because they are equally as in the cack as we are, and they need our support. That is vital.
Yeah.
I think Hugh wants to jump in on that one.
Can I chip in? Can I just chip in? I think it's a really interesting question, the two ends of the market and everything in the middle. But just on the fine dining, people have always been ready to spend money on exceptional fine dining experiences. I think versions of the tasting menu can work but what people are going to be expecting is maybe for the experience to be curated or presented in a different way. People may want to gather with their friends. Perhaps they've agreed to trust each other in terms of how they socially distance, and then you can feed them as a group in a really special way. So I think things like private dining rooms, private event spaces, I think some of us are gonna have to get out of our kitchens, maybe even go to people's homes to give them the kind of experiences that they used to expect in a restaurant. I mean, we're very lucky here in Devon at our cookery school. We have a number of different spaces outside, undercover, an old barn, a lovely garden. If the weather's good, we can arrange things potentially quite creatively, but still distanced and look after people in an exceptional way. That's a challenge we're already starting to think about. At the cheaper end of the market, I think people are definitely going to expect more than ever value for money because everyone's going to be tight. I mean, most people are coming out of this wondering how they're going to pay the bills, wondering if they're going to have money to eat out in the way that they used to. So we have to find a way to offer them value for money. But one thing that Michel touched on, I think is really interesting, our suppliers. I think when you think even a little bit about how this virus may have started, it possibly wasn't in fact completely unconnected with the food industry. I think more than ever, people are going to care very deeply about where their food comes from, and they're going to find tremendous reassurance in the provenance of their food. They want to know who raised this animal, who grew these vegetables, where did they come from, how did they get here? And if we can tell them, if we can reassure them by telling them that story, that we're on that, we know the answer to all those questions, we've got the provenance covered, they're going to find that hugely reassuring, and they're much more likely to put their trust back in us than if we are simply serving anonymous food where they don't really know or understand where it's come from.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, it raises a very good point. You know, what do you think the long-term impact to our suppliers is going to be, and how long do you think it will take them to get re-established? I.e., you know, the replanting and harvesting of crops, which take time to grow, which haven't been harvested. Some crops haven't been harvested. You know, the slaughter and aging of meat, the dairy production of specialty cheeses, all the stuff that's been kind of put on hold during this lockdown period. You know, how long and what impact do you think that's going to have to our supply chain, Jason?
I think you know, basically the whole process to get rebooted is going to take, you know, time. You know, when you're buying meat from your butcher and it take, you know, you're aging your ducks, you're aging your cottonbuffs, you're aging your you know, everything, right? Your fish supplier. Well, I know they're day boats, but they've got to go back out there, get back in the system again. It's a very interesting question. I mean, you know, we're constantly doing Zoom meetings with our supply chain to see, you know, what that's going to look like. You know, are we going to be able to offer the same standard of fish we were offered before we closed? Are we going to be able to offer the same standard of meat? And to raise your point from before about prices, we are absolutely looking at some cheaper options for our a la carte. Whereas before at Pollen Street, for a perfect example, it was turbot, bass, and red mullet on the fish. A perfect example as well. You know, we don't think we can start back with 4 luxury fishes on the menu. We'll probably go with 2 luxury and 2 a step down, like line caught cod or something like that, which is still a fantastic piece of fish. But when people go to top Michelin star restaurants, they're expecting turbot, sea bass, hand dive scallops. But I think, you know, the smart money's on coming in at a little bit of a better price point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hugh, have you any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think like Jason, we talk to our suppliers all the time, and it's interesting that quite a few of them are finding ways to adapt to the current situation. A lot of our dry goods suppliers, people like Hodmer-Dodds, who grow fantastic dried peas and beans and pulses here in the UK, their market till now has been largely a restaurant market, but they are adapting to mail order. Instead of sending 25 kilo bags out to restaurants, they're sending 1-2 kilo supplies direct to people's homes. Everything is changing, and some of the things that are changing in lockdown are likely to endure. Suppliers are looking for new relationships with the industry, new relationships with diners and end users, and we've got to be around to help facilitate that. People are still going to eat, whether they eat in or whether they eat out. So the food producers, if they don't supply us, they'll have to find a way to supply different sectors of the market. But we want to work with them. We want to help them. And as I was saying earlier, if we do, the closer we work with them, the better we're positioned to tell our customers, to tell our guests exactly where their food is coming from and the name of the person who grew it and how it got there today. And those things are going to count for more than they ever have, I think. David, you've taken your turn to mute.
I've taken my turn. We had a great question coming from Will from Hawksmoor. Some aspects of our industry were creaking at the seams before this crisis, staffing and property being obvious examples. And there may be an opportunity to try and fix some of these things now. What would be on your wish list, Michel?
Gosh, wish list. How long have we got? It's difficult. It's a difficult one, and I don't want to upset too many people. Shall I stick to just the landlords? I think that there's a lot that could be done with the landlords, and the whole system there needs to be looked at again. I think there needs a realignment of the cost of the rents and the rates, and they need to be realistic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really important part of the whole success of the industry coming back with the right bounce.
I think you and Jason want to jump in there.
Yeah, I think you know, to second that on the landlords, I think when you are looking at you know, we recently had a rent review. I won't name and shame the companies, but one of the big agencies came along on behalf of the landlord, sat down and said, well, you know, we've just let a restaurant around the corner to Novikov, and he's willing to pay XYZ per square foot. So that means your restaurant's got to be worth XYZ per square foot. And, you know, all of that stuff has got to stop. Do you know, for me, rent has got to be, you know, once the business is up and established, you know, working alongside the landlords of because if you're running a 50-cover fine dining restaurant and you're trying to attain greatness, you don't want to do more covers, even if you could do more covers, because it's not purely just about making money. It's about positioning that restaurant in the right thing. I know landlords want to achieve return on investment and all that type of stuff, but it has got the whole thing in central London is just out of control, and I think that would be my number one on my wish list, and then probably number two, trying to see how we, you know, staff turnover is a massive killer for our industry, and the retraining what costs thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds in HR and all the rest of it, and how do we get on top of that? Because once upon a time it was the hours are too long, so that got corrected. Then now the hours are, now it's not the hours anymore. Now it's the pay. The pay's getting better, but we can't put the price up in the restaurants because, you know, the guests don't want to pay any more than they're already paying. So you're constantly battling as a restaurateur of how you balance the books, keep the staff happy, keep them well trained, and keep your customers happy. And people see a full restaurant and think that, you know, you make a fortune, and you don't. It's a very fine line between making money and not making money in restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, that leads us on to a very good question from Andrew from the SRA. Despite obvious and immediate financial pressure, with 2.6 million hospitality workers on furlough, most operators seem to be signalling that once furlough ends, there will be significant further job losses. Do you think there's a risk of public opinion question this public spend? And how do we ensure we're not on the wrong side of this coming debate as operators? You?
Well, that is a very tough question. I mean, if we can't keep the public on side, if we can't keep our guests happy and wanting to come to restaurants, then we're going to lose this battle. I'd just like to go back to the last question about opportunity, because there's one thing I don't want to slip by in this. There aren't many upsides to this current situation for the hospitality industry. There really aren't. But one possible one, which I think the SRA will also duly note, is that I think there's a chance now to become a less wasteful industry. A lot of us have been working at this for quite some time anyway, but there has been traditionally a lot of extravagance in the hospitality industry and a lot of waste. We talk about the crazy hotel buffets that get replenished so that nothing ever looks out of place, and at the end of the morning it's all swept aside. One thing we know for certain is that people at home are wasting a lot less food than they used to during lockdown. And I think it's made people so much more conscious of the value of food. You can't always get the ingredients they want. Creative cooks are having to be even more creative to feed their families. And there's something in that I think can feed back to the industry, and there's an opportunity to carry our guests with us on that. So they will support, perhaps more limited menus, menus, as Jason said, that don't necessarily always have such extravagant ingredients. And our guests more than ever will understand what a thrifty industry wasting less is worth and why it's worth pursuing that as a goal. And the question comes back to the main question asked by are we going to be able to keep our customers on side if they see the government putting a lot of money into an industry, perhaps a disproportionate amount of money into an industry? Well, that depends on how we behave and whether we show that we're being responsible and whether we are prepared to cut our cloth, make adaptations, be more thrifty, adapt, and give our customers exactly what they want. And if we do all those things and somehow in all that find a way to stay in business, then I think the government investment in our industry will be fully justified.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very good. I've got a question come through from Toby Gaynor of HG Walters. As a supplier to mainly independent restaurants, do the panelists think the credit terms for hospitality businesses will be a thing of the past? Jason, do you want to take that one?
I think the supply chain, we've always ran 30 days, and I'm now thankful of that because, I just ran it out of principle because 30 days gives us time to get the product in, gives us time to process the invoices, double check the credit notes, and then get it back to any problems. We can then get it corrected, or if there's a problem with the product, we can get it changed, and then we can pay on the 1st of every month. Now, some companies run 60, 90, 120 days. I think probably the supply chain aren't going to be able to afford to offer 60, 90, 120. I think those days are gone. And I think some small suppliers, like HG Walters, who the meat is just fantastic, by the way, I think might even want cash on delivery. We're preempting that. We're putting a bit of cash flow to one side. So some of our more boutique suppliers who rely on cash flow, if they need cash on delivery or need a week or 10 days credit, then that's what we'll have to do. I think it's supporting each other, right? Some companies are bigger, they'll have bigger cash flows and can afford to offer us 30 days. And I think that's basically where we'll be for a few years, I think.
Another question from Peter Harden. Leaving aside government requirements like social distancing, restaurants may well have to adapt their core food and drink offering when the trade is allowed to reopen in order to send customers back in. Any ideas on what things could be floated to help this happen? You?
Sure. I mean, I think we've talked about this quite a bit already. It's about creativity. It's about finding new ways to offer new experiences along with the food. I don't think we should assume that all the social distancing protocols will be absolute passion killers for our guests, but they are going to be hard to adapt to. It was interesting reading an article about reopening of restaurants in Hong Kong recently. You do have a different cultural norms there, where people have worn masks on the street quite publicly and openly for a number of years anyway, which perhaps changes the perception. But people are going to have to, work with these changes, and if they are, I mean, if they're imposed as rules, well, we can lobby against them. But before we do that, I think we have to understand why they're there, and if they are going to protect our guests. And if we think there are other ways to protect our guests, then we can suggest how we might do that. But otherwise, we're going to have to work with the protocols. I think that one of the hardest things is going to be large groups, people who want to come out with a big bunch and have a big family celebration or a big party of friends where they expect to be close to each other and leaning across the table and talking loudly. I think we may be able to partition much smaller groups in a way that's quite creative. Just before this started, Jason was telling us very interestingly about various people were developing various quite arty screens that could be rolled down between tables that would encapsulate in different ways the branding or the image of the restaurant. Could be quite nice to look at. One of the assumptions is that a lot of the solutions are going to be plastic based, that everyone's going to be wearing plastic masks or visors or bibs, and anything that comes down between you is going to be a plastic or perspex screen. I think it's really important to remember there's been so much talk about plastic coming to the rescue, and in some respects it has. But plastic is actually, we understand, one of the materials on which this virus can persist for longer than either fabric or cardboard, which are of course more sustainable fabrics anyway. So let's be properly creative in how we divide up our groups and put dividers between tables, and how we dress, if we need to, our waiting staff and our chefs, how we mask them. It isn't necessarily the case that it's going to be very surgical, very plastic. This is yet another thing that ultimately, if it's going to endure in the industry for a while, we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to make it look okay and feel okay. And I don't think we need to shrink from that challenge. I think we need to step up and meet that challenge.
Yeah, no, very, very good point. I'm also getting lots of questions coming in around Tronc and how service staff or all staff have been affected by that not being included as part of the furlough payment. And if we think there's going to be any changes to the industry post COVID-19 and the way we adapt and use Tronc. Michel, any thoughts on that?
Well, I've never been a fan of the Tronc system or the service charge system, and but saying that, if the furlough system as it is and as I understand it at the moment is not including it, it means the vast majority of the people working in our industry are not going to get much money at all, and that can't be right.
Yeah, no, agreed. Jason, you got any thoughts on that subject?
I think, we've got a, it's something the industry's been stuck with for a while, to be honest. I think now, when you progress from being an employee to an employer, and you move up the ladder, if you want to speak, it's more of a burden than a benefit. I think it's something which has enabled restaurants in the UK. I know people say, going out eating fine dining is expensive, but if you put us alongside the continent, it's actually one of the cheapest places in Europe to go and eat fine dining food. I think, honestly, if I could have it my way, I'd sooner increase prices, just pay the staff the wages, including what their Tronc was, and just give it to them as one clean wage on the 1st of every month. And then the customers don't tip, a little bit like Danny Mayer's done in America. But it takes a brave soul to do that, because once you do that, your prices go up 20%. And is that going to scare the customers off? I mean, they're paying it anyway, but they pay it through the Tronc scheme, and I think they pay 12.5%. But I think we worked it out that we'd have to put our prices up by 18% to cover the full national insurance and tax implications will come along with that. And it's a really tricky thing to do. And right now, are you going to go back in there and increase your prices by 20%? Probably not. You know, it's probably suicide. So it's a really tricky one. I think it's a really tricky situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clients and customers have different ways of dealing with it over the years. Next one's for you, Hugh. Do you feel the hospitality sector will benefit from an independent union headed up by leading professionals who know the industry inside and out?
Goodness. I don't know. I mean, now is the right time to be thinking of all sorts of new approaches and different ways of doing things. If having an independent union ultimately is a good way to retain staff over a long time, then I wouldn't necessarily be against that. I think that as with the trunk system, as with looking at how we look after everyone in the restaurant, from the plongeurs to the front of house to the highest chefs and everyone in between, we want to retain staff. We want to help them feel that they're entering an industry that's a career for them, that's maybe joining a restaurant group that gives them a whole arc for their career. The business of losing people and fast turnover has, as Jason has rightly said, been one of the bugbears of this industry. And we need to do what we can to make everyone feel that they've got structure, that they've got support, that they've got rights, and that they're going to be looked after. That doesn't necessarily get easy to do at a time when we know we're going to be even more financially on our toes than we ever have been as an industry. But it is also the right time to be having all these hard conversations that have, you know, tended to get pushed down the line in the last decade or two.
I think on the question of do we have unions look after our industry? I think there's certainly aspects of our industry could benefit from it. But you know, here's the question what I pose, and this is always the problem I have with unions, because I work in New York as well, is it can breed a very lazy environment, and I'm going to be very controversial by saying that. The unions inside hotels in New York City, it's a killer. Jim. I mean, you know, there's the union-based hotels. It's very different. If you look at the Ritz-Carlton on the big park. Sorry, I'll get it in a minute. Yeah, Central Park. There you go. Thanks, Chef. It doesn't have a restaurant because it can't afford to run it, because they just can't make it work. And that restaurant had a very successful BLT restaurant in it at one time called BLT Market. I went to it. It was fantastic, and it did $18 million a year turnover and still lost money. So you tell me how that is right? It's not right. Do you know? It's not right. So I think, you know, here's the thing, right? For me to get in the position I got into, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, this is the path I chose. I worked in 6 3-star restaurants, pretty much back to back, and I chose to work 17 hours a day, like 5 days a week minimum. Some of the restaurants are 6 days a week. I'm not saying that's correct, but that was my choice to do that, and that gave me a grounding in the cuisine I wanted to be grounded in, which gave me to be able to catapult me from living in a caravan site in Skegness to having did have a successful life. Whether it will be when we get back, we will see. But that's the choice I took. Now, when you unionize things and it becomes one rule for all, it's very tricky. And I'm talking about fine dining food here, because you know, when you do fine dining food, it takes time to produce that, and it takes manpower, and it's a part of the business you choose to be in, because it's elite cooking, and that's just how it is. You have to dedicate your life to it. So it's tricky, right? It's tricky. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, no, very true. Next question coming to you, Michel. What changes do you think the consumers will be looking for when we go back to, you know, as soon as we can open our doors? You know, there's been comments around single-use menus, no tablecloths, staff wearing masks, guests wearing masks. What do you think will make a customer feel comfortable? They'll be looking for
reassurance. You know, that's it. That the restaurateur is aware of all of the protocol and how they approach that. So absolutely everything. And hygiene. I mean, hygiene is a given in restaurants anyway, but we are going to have to be serious on our toes. I mean, everything down to the highly polished shoes, the absolutely perfect uniform. Everything is going to be looked at in a totally different light by our guests, and that's for sure. So reassurance, but reassurance can start from the very moment somebody arrives at the front door, or from the very moment somebody even makes a booking, makes a reservation. So all of those protocols we're already working on, and we're discussing with the front of house team and with the chefs. How are we going to reassure our guests that we are on this and that they are safe? And that is the most important thing. But it's also two-way. Reassuring your staff as well that they are safe too, because that's equally as important.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. I'm mindful of time. We've only got 3 minutes left, so a little bit of light-hearted fun for the last question. Which restaurant will you first visit once this is all finished? I don't know. Jason, do you want to take that one?
Nando's. No, I'm joking. I'll be. What have I missed? Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's just so many great restaurants. So I mean, there's a whole raft of them. But Savile, I like going to Savile quite a lot. It's around the corner from Pollen Street, so I use it quite regularly. So I'll certainly be popping in to see Nivers. That's for sure.
You? Which one about you?
Well, I'll probably pop down to Lyme Regis for an ice cream down on the beach. That's the sort of thing my kids are missing the most. But if and when I do, I'm not saying I won't be coming back. When I make it up to the Big Smoke, I'll probably be heading to St John's. I think that's the kind of old places like that where you're going to get an incredible welcome, where everybody's going to be working their socks off to make you have a fantastic time, and the vibe is just superb. So that probably be high on my list. Present company, obviously, in the queue as well. But yeah.
No, and Michelle, what about you?
For me, it's all about local. I mean, I support the local restaurants. I live in Clapham, so I always go and as often as I can to all my local restaurants, and so I mean, I'll be going down to see Adam Byatt. I'll be going down to see the dairy as well, of course, the guys there. And Chez Bruce too. I mean, all of those, and all the other ones as well. All the other little takeaways and all the curry houses and all of that, which I'm a huge fan of. And I think we should all go to our local restaurant as a #1 priority.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yes.
Okay, guys, thanks for everyone. Apologies for everyone who sent a question in. There's been literally hundreds of them. I'm sorry I couldn't read them all. But I'd like to personally thank the panel, Hugh, Michelle and Jason. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a really great chat and I've really enjoyed it. As for the next episode for Future of Hospitality series will be focused around UK events, conferencing scene post-COVID-19, hosted by Tracy Astles, talking to Bernard Donoghue from ALVA, Heather Lishman from ABPCO, Adam Morris from BCD and Jane Longhurst from MIA. For more information about our programs, please go to RA Group's website where you can download the broadcast links. Many thanks.
Cheers, guys.